Hello and welcome to the CosmoParenting Podcast, brought to you by the CMM Institute for Personal and Social Evolution. In this space, we invite you to see yourself as someone who is curious about and actively participating in creating your own meaning around parenting. This is our Communicate episode, in which the fourth episode of each month, we will wrap up our theme by offering some ideas for communicating with your children, co-parents, or whoever else might be a part of your parenting, to start having conversations about the things you're learning here. Let's begin. Today, I am joined again by Don Waisanen. Don is a father to 3 boys, as well as a professor at the Baruch College at City University of New York's Mark School of Public and International Affairs. He is also a consultant, author, and an improviser. Hi, Don. Welcome back.
Hey, Abbie, great to be back. Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you here again. Today, we are talking about adaptation. So we're kind of exploring this paradox of how do we count on needing to be adaptable, needing to be flexible? What does it look like to kind of plan for that? And I'll mention too that in our last episode, Stephanie offered us the strategy of read the room, and I built on that by adding the Noren model. So both about being really present in our communication with each other and taking in information and then responding accordingly. So with all that in mind, I'm really curious to know, what would you want to share with us today about how people who are parenting could be communicating around adaptation?
Sure, thanks. I'll say, first of all, I'm glad you're talking there about planning and adaptation, both of those, because I'll tell you what, I've been doing improv for 25 years now, and particularly improv performances. And I'll tell people, like, we have a weekly rehearsal with some of the groups I work with.
Yeah.
They go, how can you rehearse for that? There's nothing to rehearse. It's improv. It's all just completely freewheeling. It's like, no, actually, it's not. We have certain structures underneath what we do that we improvise on. And one of which I shared last time was yes, and just that we're going to affirm the realities of others and try to build on them. That's one of them. There's many more. But I think it's the same with parenting, that we're ultimately trying to adapt, but we're not going in plan free, right? So a lot of life, I think, it plays out in very scripted ways. And one of the books I really like is Jeff Katzman and Dan O'Connor's Life Unscripted, where they talk a lot about this need to look at our scripts, to unscript, to rescript. And I think it's the same when it comes to adaptation. I look at my 6-year-old, and my plan for him is, we're going to go to the park right now. We're going to go play pickleball. We did this yesterday. And all of a sudden he's got a tear in his eye. And I just ignore that because I've got my plan. We're going to go to the park. And I don't stop and just adapt. What's going on? I was thinking my friend wasn't here today and I really wanted them to. I need to be there at the moment, ready to just adapt to what's happening. So there's lots of adaptations that I think for us parents are really hard to make. One of the big ones right now is the internet and screens, and there's lots of public discussions around this. I just think a lot about how I was in a generation, we grew up my growing up years, we didn't have internet, and then my teenage years, we did. And so I remember life before and life after, and I keep trying to remember, this has just been their world the entire time. So how do I adapt to that? I can't fully do it. I can't coordinate and cohere completely with them. So I think part of adaptation is mystery, leaving yourself open to what's the mystery that they're presenting with. Like, my kid plays Fortnite and I have no idea half of what's going on in there. But I realize sometimes, like, it's good for me to walk in and I just make commentary as he's playing the game. I try to make funny commentary and he seems to like it because I have no idea what's going on. But it's a great moment just to adapt and go, I don't know, like, there's mystery here. I could rant and rail against this game that he plays, but he's there to sort of show me that you need to adapt to me as well, Dad. There needs to be structured spontaneity with what happens. With the screens thing, I think part of adaptation too is just us as parents. Also, we've come to realize, like, during the pandemic, our kids really went on screens a lot. And so what is it to adapt well, to plan and adapt well? We often will let our kids play screens on, say, a Saturday morning after a long week, but we'll say after lunch, you've got to go get out there. You've got to go play. And they'll say, oh no, I'm so bored. I don't know what to do. But kids are resilient and they figure it out. I think I'm at a place where I'm like, constant adaptations are what this is really about. At the end of the day, we're not going to fully figure this parenting thing out ever, but going back and forth with our kids, seeing where they're at, making new plans, updating our plans versus a more fundamentalist approach to parenting, which is just like, here's the script. This is the way it is. This is the way the universe works. There's no room for adaptation. I think about that now as really the opposite of the parenting task. Adaptation
Hmm.
is at the core.
It is such a huge and interesting question to say, how do parents who were raised in such a different context parent children in such a different context? That's not the most eloquent way to say that question, but adaptability is a great response to that question because you don't know what it's like and we don't know what it's like. It is new for all of us
Yeah,
to raise children in a world that is so saturated in technology. And so all we can do is adapt together.
I think that's right. And you see this even going on with the debates out there about, well, social media and screens and phones. And there's a really prescriptive way I see a lot of folks going at that. Like the debates are really complicated. You know, when kids are on screens, sometimes they're with friends. They are actually socializing in a way that I never did growing up, but I can see
Yeah.
there is a lot of community socialization stuff going on through that. Now, do we want to stay there? No, we want them to get out and play and go do all the other stuff, but it's just different.
Hmm.
And Abbie, I think we should recognize my 6-year-old came, we'll share this with listeners.
Yes,
My
yes.
6-year-old came barging into the room while we were recording. Can I go play at my friend's house? And I'm waving my hand. It just struck me that this is exactly it. This is like, what we're talking about just happened, and that's what it's like. So, okay, how do I deal with this while I'm recording? Go play with
Hmm.
your friends.
Hmm. And if you create a family culture that is inflexible and overly structured, then a moment like that would have a totally different tone. You know, if you are creating an environment that is about adaptability because you're modeling that in your parenting and you're trying to help your kids also be adaptable, then a little
Yeah.
moment, oh, you came in when you weren't supposed to come in. We're flexible, we're adapting. No big deal, move on. You know, so it's like a structure, like a rigidity to being overly structured, I think creates such a tension
Yes.
in a family culture. I think kids, you know, internalize that for sure. And so the adaptability, and I really am, as we're talking, appreciating the choice of the word adaptability, because I do want people to think about flexibility and spontaneity, but the word really is adaptability. And I'm thinking about like how species adapt and evolve over time. That is about adapting to the environment.
Yes.
Our environment is changing all the time. And so it really is a question of how are we adapting to the space that we're in, the community we're in, the culture we're in.
Yeah, it's responsive.
Yeah, right.
Responsive and responsible adaptation, because I think maybe what we're arriving at here. And by the way, I just want to put out there, like for listeners, please chime into this because
Yeah.
this is an area I just constantly struggle with. I think you're right. It's the fundamentalist version of it, of overly scripting. It's not responsive. At the same time, just complete nothing but improvisation and
Hmm.
that kind of parenting where everything is permissible, like that's not going to work either.
Right.
So there's a kind of a middle space there of adaptation, again, like structured spontaneity.
Yeah, right, right. And it's taking me back to the question of CosmoParenting. What does it mean to parent? That's an individual question for everyone to answer. And so that really is a question of what's the balance for you?
Yeah.
And you need to find that balance for yourself. And so I appreciate all that you've shared today, Don. And thanks for joining us again. We'll hear from you again in a future Communicate episode. So I'll look forward to continuing the conversation there. And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us too. Don't forget to check out www.cosmoactivities.com, where you can find all of our other resources in this series, which are available for free. And I'd also love to invite you to comment on this podcast episode on the Cosmo Parenting Substack. Don just gave us a great call to action to be a part of this conversation with us. We don't pretend to have all the answers. We'd love to be in dialogue with you and be learning from each other in that way. So we're so grateful to be on this journey with you. And we will look forward to joining you next week for a very special bonus episode where we will spend some time thinking about the past 3 themes together: stories, patterns, and adaptation.